The American people are incredible, and we're the best. You know, I was asked by Xi Jinping about when I was in the Tibetan mountains with him, and he said, "Can you define America for me?" I said, "Yeah, one word: possibilities."
Yeah, Joe Biden hiked through the Tibetan mountains with Xi Jinping in 1948, leading up to the Communist Revolution under Mao Zedong. That didn't happen. He is a mental meltdown case. Hey, William, people enjoyed your call. People liked your call. A lot of people liked your call. And you do sound like you're 19. I got to say, you sound like you're 19. That's okay. And it sounds like you're asking questions, and that's very good. Very good. Got one here says from a career overseas person, let's say. Says, I'll bet you $1 William has never left the country. That may be the case. And another one, Randy said, well, 27 is the new 18. 27 is the new 18, which is largely true. But that's it. The reality is that this American airman, a senior airman that self-immolated Aaron Bushnell at the Israeli embassy, let's see, about, 46 hours ago. About 46 hours ago, he self-immolated. And he killed himself. And we're learning more about it because he cared very deeply. And we played the audio of him yesterday self-immolating, and it's pretty dramatic stuff, I've got to say. I brought it to the Newsmax, the video Newsmax people yesterday afternoon. It was during the meeting and a Zoom call with people in New York and stuff. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of different. He was protesting. He's in his battle dress uniforms, BDUs, the camouflage, Air Force camouflage. Senior airman, he was on track to be an IT guy, information technology guy, which means that, his career in the Air Force would lead to work outside of the Air Force. If you're an F-16 pilot, you're probably not going to get a job as an F-16 pilot after you leave the Air Force, but the IT guys, they get jobs after. And he made some, what I would consider to be very bad decisions about committing suicide in one of the most horrifying ways imaginable. Go find the Golden Gate Bridge or something and do that. Find a handgun, whatever you want to do, but setting yourself on fire. Pretty crazy stuff.
Free Palestine! Free Palestine!
He's on fire now, and he's yelling Free Palestine, and the flames are being sucked into his lungs and burning the cilia off of his lungs, so he couldn't yell for very long while that was going on. And it was a horrible thing, of course, so horrible that really all you can do is look for the joke in there, because you can't absorb this stuff every day and then go have dinner with your best girl like everything's okay. You gotta be able to move on. Look at it from the 30,000-foot view. Realize that things like this happen in history, and it would be best if things like this didn't happen. And by what was all of this inspired? Well, Aaron Bushnell on social media and his friends on social media calling him comrade and saying he's one of the most principled comrades I've ever known. And he's looking to achieve liberation for all people worldwide. And his pronouns are he and him. And so he's a radical lefty who is part of at least 2 different anarchist groups. And that means that politically, he's a lefty, a radical lefty, and obviously an extremist based on everything that we know about him at this point. Now, I got to say, and I mentioned it before, but you may recall that Joe Biden's military was looking to, let's go to Lloyd Austin and Cobble Kirby, because Lloyd Austin, by the way, Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of our entire Department of Defense, you may recall, former 4-star General, U.S. Army. And so we got the military running the military. We used to have civilian control when Republicans were in charge, but never mind that. They've got military control, and their spokespeople are military people, and their civilian leadership positions are taken up by military people, which is kind of interesting. You got to look out for the left at all times. But Lloyd Austin, he disappeared into the hospital for weeks and didn't tell anybody. You remember this? there are only 3 wars going on or whatever in the U.S. military, engaged all over the place. Well, you'll be happy to know that the Pentagon has completed an investigation into Lloyd Austin's hospitalization, and they've determined that no one did anything wrong. Everything was just fine. Pay no attention. Who was to blame for Lloyd Austin's disappearance and the hospitalization? The Pentagon has investigated, and they've determined that no one is responsible for doing anything wrong, which is very helpful, I think. Very nice. It's good to be a Democrat because of a Republican. Yeah. Who's to blame for the secrecy surrounding Lloyd Austin's hospitalization? A Pentagon report says no one. See, so now that the investigation is done. But you may remember that General/Secretary, the amazing disappearing Lloyd Austin, what was this, in 2021, I think, talking about cleansing the military of extremists. Got to get all the extremists out of the military.
If confirmed, I will fight hard to stamp out sexual assault.
Good
and to
idea.
rid our ranks of racists and extremists.
Racists.
The job of the Department of Defense is to keep America safe from our enemies.
Uh-huh.
But we can't do that if some of those enemies lie within our own ranks.
That's right. Now, those enemies apparently don't include anarchists who are online all over the place talking about their comrades and liberation theology and all of this madness, because, you got to get rid of racists and extremists. But I guess you couldn't get all of them. And radicals like Professor Cornel West, isn't he running for president or something? Nobody notices when he does, but crazy Cornel West with his weird clothes and his weird hair and his weird beard and his weird teeth, and a hero of the Democrat Party, posting on this suicidal lunatic jihadi. Cornel West says, "Let us never forget the extraordinary courage and commitment of brother Aaron Bushnell." I don't think he would have called him brother a week ago, but that's okay. "Who died for truth and justice." That's not what he died for. "I pray for his precious loved ones." Thanks very much, Cornel West. "Let us rededicate ourselves to genuine solidarity with Palestinians undergoing genocidal attacks in real time." See, and Aaron Bushnell was yelling before he self-immolated about the genocide that's going on. Now, the Palestinians are not, there are more Palestinians today than there were, there are fewer now than there were 4 months ago, but there are a lot more than there were 10 years ago and 20 years ago. But Aaron Bushnell screaming about the genocide, which is not being perpetrated against the Palestinian people. And, back to William saying, well, Israel says 10,000 children have been killed. There is a war going on that was instigated, started by Hamas, which is a radical Islamic terror group funded by Iran, which is the granddaddy of them all at this point, of radical Islamic terrorist groups. And Aaron Bushnell sounded, kind of like Cornel West's.
I am an active duty member of the United States Air Force, and I will no longer be complicit in genocide.
You're not complicit in genocide.
I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest.
Extreme act of protest.
But compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all.
Not at all.
This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal.
This is what our ruling class has decided will be normal. You got this radical left-wing lexicon that rolls out very naturally. And, the poor SOB is, he was so misguided. And it's obviously the left that poisoned his thinking. Now, Cobble Kirby, he's another retired Navy admiral, I think 1-star, who was a spokesman at the Pentagon. And so they've got military people everywhere in these civilian positions, the left does. And Cobble Kirby on how they're going to cleanse the military of extremists.
As we worked through things over the course of the last 8-9 months, we believe that less than 100 or about 100 active duty or reserve component members of the military participated in some prohibited extremist activities.
100 if we include it. We're talking about millions and millions of people. active duty and reservists. They found that after their exhaustive search for extremists, that they expelled from the military 100 reservists or active duty that participated in. So what did they go to Burning Man? I wonder if this guy ever went to Burning Man. You think that Aaron Bushnell ever went to Burning Man? It's a big festival in the desert. They have music and things. Do a lot of drugs. But we got that. So they got 100. But apparently they weren't looking for anarchists. Because if they had been looking for anarchists in their ranks, then maybe Aaron Bushnell would have been expelled. But now they're praising their martyr, right? And also Aaron Bushnell was calling for people to join a cell. Join a cell. Now, what is that about? With his he, him pronouns. He's got his. So the left obviously got into his head. And we've had the left on college campuses, you know, including the president of Harvard University and of MIT and of University of Pennsylvania. They've got it, you know, this is what the left does. The left is a toxin. The left is poison. And I guess if it were 1939, they'd be saddling up with Hitler and his Socialist Workers' Party, wouldn't he? So let's go back to yesterday at the Israeli embassy, where Democrats and other jihadis showed up to show their support for the self-immolating, Hamas-loving, anti-Israel tragic story. And he's clearly, obviously, a tragic story, you know, but I can't internalize it and say, oh, well, you know, I'm not going to enjoy my lunch because Aaron Bushnell lost his mind. You know, I've been following news for a long time. I'm capable of moving on. I really am. So outside the Israeli embassy yesterday in support of Aaron Bushnell.
This is in solidarity with Aaron.
Burning.
We burned his body. At the very least, we can burn the Zionist flag.
Burning the Israeli flag in front of the Israeli embassy. And the lunatics, blah, blah. You should all self-immolate. Honestly, why don't you do it as a group? Because you're halfway to Jonestown already, you bunch of lunatics.
You killed that man! You killed
Yelling
that
at
man.
the Secret
You
Service.
pulled your guns out instead of fire extinguishers! You pulled your guns out instead of fire extinguishers! You pulled your
She really
guns
seems
out
to care.
instead of fire extinguishers!
Doesn't she?
You killed that man! You killed that man!
Well, no, they didn't.
Bushnell. You did, all of you! All of you!
All the police. I think she
criminal.
might be anti-police. I think that she's definitely a Joe Biden voter. Let me just say that. She might have participated in Scream at the Sky Day, don't you think? She might have been in Scream at the Sky because these people are very, very unwell. Yeah. And they're all comrades. They're comrades, according to Aaron Bushnell and his friends. And, you know, affiliated with Antifa, the radical left-wing terrorist group founded in Germany in the 1930s and adopted by the Democrat Party. Absolutely amazing. That's your good stuff. Yeah, so the crazy lady, Biden voter, screaming at the police, the Uniform Division of the U.S. Secret Service provides embassy security, and there are probably D.C. Metropolitan Police there as well. And she's screaming at the police, you killed this man. It's like, no, actually, ma'am, we didn't. He killed himself. Here's the videotape. Want to watch it with us? Because we didn't kill him. But it's true that police officers came up correctly with their guns drawn. And one of the officers screaming, get a fire extinguisher, get a fire extinguisher. But when you've got a lunatic in camouflage who self-immolated, drenched himself in gasoline or a flammable fluid, set himself on fire in a screaming Free Palestine, that guy might reach into his pocket, pull out a detonator, and blow up his suicide vest and kill everybody in the neighborhood, right? He might also pull out 2 pistols and start shooting at everybody around. So the police, now if you're doing that to yourself, you're certainly capable of hurting other people. And the police officers on the scene responded entirely appropriately. And the lady is like, well, you think that at the entrance to the Israeli embassy, they have a row of fire extinguishers readily available for moments when Democrats show up and self-immolate? That's probably not true. One police officer was yelling, get a fire extinguisher, get a fire extinguisher. All right? But at this point, you know, Democrats are self-immolating that have never self-immolated before. They show up outside the Israeli embassy, the Israeli consulate in Atlanta, Georgia, with a Palestinian flag, and they self-immolate. They show up on the steps of the Supreme Court on Earth Day, and they self-immolate because they have no sense of irony. In order to protest people putting smoke in the sky, you set yourself on fire and turn yourself into smoke in the sky. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But, there are a lot of crazy people out there, and that crazy lady yelling, you killed him. She's obviously mentally ill. She's not up to everyday life in the modern world, where members of her party are self-immolating, where members of her party are launching suicide attacks against the police and members of Congress. But this is the Democrat Party. This is what they've done to the United States of America. And here's this lunatic, Bushnell, talking about his comrades and joining a cell, and his pronouns are he, him, and his liberation. He's a crazy lefty. The only thing that's really out about this is that he joined the U.S. military. The rest of it is just kind of an everyday Democrat story.
You killed Aaron Bushnell. You did, all of you pigs and war criminals.
Hey, it's Chris Plant, excited to tell you about our July 2024 Listener Sea Cruise. We'll be sailing around the British Isles, visiting Scotland and Ireland. Please join us. Visit ChrisPlantCruise.com.
We got Joe Biden on TV and eating ice cream and lying about stuff. We got updates on the border and all kinds of madness. But before we get to that, and a clip from The Godfather, I hope. Let's go to Mike calling from Upper Marlboro, Maryland. Michael, you're on the Chris Plant Show.
Chris, I want to congratulate you on, deducing, just figuring out that a guy that set himself on fire is an extremist. That's really good for you, Chris. But, who else has been called extremists throughout history? Gandhi, Thomas Paine, George Washington, everybody that's ever stood up for truth and justice has been called an extremist when they do it in a way that puts their life on the line.
Oh, I don't know about that. You're saying the British Crown called George Washington extremist and Thomas Paine?
I'm sure they did.
Well, perhaps they did. And who else? Gandhi? Gandhi was such a peacenik, it was kind of hard to call him an extremist. I'm not sure what your point is. You don't think that he was an extremist with his comrades and his join a cell and his he, him pronouns, and then he self-immolated yelling Free Gaza, which is run by Hamas, a terrorist organization. You don't think that's he said it, he used the word extreme himself before he set himself on fire.
By the way, I think he got that wrong. I think it's Hezbollah that's funded by Iran. I think Hamas gets their money somewhere else.
Well, you're wrong about that. You're wrong about that. The Houthis get their money from Iran and their weapons, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and Hezbollah.
I'm about to engage in an extreme act of protest, but compared to what people have been experiencing in Palestine at the hands of their colonizers, it's not extreme at all.
They're colonizers. I love that, the colonizers. Yeah. Going back to Abraham, they colonized. Then they colonized again when the Jewish slaves exited Egypt under the pharaohs. But then he set himself on fire. Not an extremist or anything. Now, I was pinging back and forth with my friend Seton Motley. And telling about the self-immolating guy. And he said, it reminds me of the scene, Seton said, in Godfather Part 2, when Michael Corleone goes to Havana, Cuba, under the Batista regime before the communist revolution of Fidel Castro, which the Democrats prefer. And Barack Obama prefers the Castros and Che Guevara. He loved posing with Che Guevara murals in Cuba and so on, and giving the Castro brothers everything they wanted because he's closer to being a commie than he is to, Barack Obama, than he is to being John F. Kennedy, that's for sure. But great scene on the rooftop in Havana, 1959, And Michael Corleone, it's the meeting of the families, and they're, cutting up Cuba. They got the cake, and they're cutting up. It's Hyman Roth's birthday, I think. And Hyman Roth is sitting there. And Michael Corleone, earlier in the day, had seen a communist being pulled over by the Cuban military, the Batista military. And the communist got out and he had a hand grenade, right? And instead of being taken by the troops, he pulls the pin on the hand grenade, jumps at the soldiers and blows himself up and kills the soldier, right? And then as Michael Corleone is relating that story to Hyman Roth, they have this little back and forth.
I saw an interesting thing happen today. A rebel was being arrested by the military police. And rather than be taken alive, he exploded a grenade he had hidden in his jacket. He killed himself, and he took a captain of the command with him. Right, Johnny?
Those rebels, they're lunatics.
Maybe so. But it occurred to me, the soldiers are paid to fight. The rebels aren't.
What does that tell you?
Hyman Roth.
They can win.
What does that tell you? They can win. A footnote and an opportunity to use a clip from The Godfather, Part 2. Great stuff, but I was talking about it earlier. Democrat Party operatives have perpetrated suicide attacks against a U.S. Capitol police officer, murdered one, nearly killed a second. They murdered the black militant radical leftist, murdered Officer William Evans, U.S. Capitol Police, Billy Evans, and then jumped out of his car, nearly killed a second one, crashing into them with his car, pitting him against the pop-up barrier in an effort to murder. And then he jumped out with his big knife and attacked the U.S. Capitol Police, who gunned him down to stop him from murdering more people. Now, that was the left and black militancy on the U.S. Capitol grounds. And what was that, 2 years ago? And the news media didn't make much out of it because it doesn't serve the Democrat Party's interests. New York City, Ishmael Brinsley from Maryland drove up to New York because Barack Obama and the Democrats had declared war on the police because they enforce laws and Democrats break laws. That's the short explanation. And Ishmael Brinsley murdered officers Ramos and Liu sitting in their cars, and then he, I guess, realized one was Hispanic, one was Asian. He wanted to murder white cops. He went to a nearby subway stop. He was a black radical also, and he shot himself in the head and killed himself. Another black radical militant in Dallas went to a Black Lives Matter rally, and the police were there to protect the Black Lives Matter protesters. And a Democrat radical black militant murdered, I believe, 9 Dallas police officers, barricaded in a concrete parking garage, and dared the police to come get him. They had to send a robot in with a bomb, drop the bomb on him, and blew him up in the... Then a similar thing happened in Baton Rouge with another black militant and murdering a number of Baton Rouge police officers, suicide attack. And then, of course, the James Hodgkinson, the Bernie Sanders campaign volunteer, shooting Congressman Steve Scalise and trying to murder every Republican on that baseball field, a whole baseball field full of Republican members of Congress, of the House and the Senate. And the police had to gun down James Hodgkinson. He was a white militant. And now we have, the suicide, the self-immolations, and those were not murderous suicide attacks, but they were political suicides and self-immolation, again, on the steps of the Supreme Court, the plaza in front of the Supreme Court, because it was Earth Day. And that guy drove in from Colorado to self-immolate at the Supreme Court because he's very concerned about the weather. Okay? Now, this is at what point does the Democrat Party become known as a terrorist organization? And Michael Corleone and Hyman Roth having this discussion. And then, of course, we knew when the movie was made that the communists did take over, the suicide attacks from the communists and so on. So this is the left. The left is really here. This is not liberalism. This is radical leftism. But good thing the defense secretary and the generals cleared out our military of extremists, because 100 of them, they say, participated in activities, probably First Amendment protected activities, that the left running the U.S. military objected to. So they punish the people for their political activities. But they didn't find this anarchist with his comrades and his, they love the pronouns thing. The Democrats in the military, they promote transgender people and all that crazy stuff. I'm telling you, we got some transgender stuff today too, don't we? Got some because the Democrats, they can't help it. But first, let's go to Joe Biden, because Joe Biden went up to New York City yesterday. He took Air Force One because he was going to be on a late night TV show, the Seth Meyers show, that essentially nobody watches. But they're doing so badly now, the Democrats and Joe Biden are, with the youth vote, which is melting away, with the black vote, which is melting away, and so many other demographics. Now they got the Muslims. The jihad vote is slipping away too in a key swing state of Michigan and also in Minnesota, because the Democrats elected these jihadis like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib to be members of the House of Representatives in the United States of America. And they raise a lot of crazy people, that's for sure. Crazy, crazy people. But Joe Biden went up to New York yesterday. And on the Seth Meyers show, in the opening monologue, they set up, Michael was watching it very closely this morning and came to the conclusion that the questions were set up with Seth Meyers ahead of time in collusion with the White House. And it's pure propaganda, Soviet-style propaganda television on, what is he on? It's NBC, still NBC. And the questions were set up and the answers, Michael believes, were in the teleprompter. All right? But because they knew they had the questions and the answers set up ahead of time, just like communist countries do their propaganda, in the monologue, the opening monologue, Seth Meyers had to set up a joke that was going to be in the Q&A because their audience wouldn't have known anything about it. I played you the audio yesterday when President Trump was at CPAC on Saturday, and he was talking about his wonderful wife, Melania, beautiful international fashion model, speaks 6 languages, smarter than any Democrat that's ever walked the earth. And then while President Trump was talking about his wife, he saw Mercedes Schlapp in the front row because Mercedes and Matt Schlapp run CPAC, her husband, and they're in the front row. And President Trump was talking about his wife, and he saw Mercedes there. And he pointed at her. I was sitting right behind Mercedes and Matt Schlapp in the audience. And President Trump pointed at Mercedes, and he acknowledged Mercedes. And then the media went bat guano crazy and said, oh, Trump doesn't even know the name of his own wife. He can't even. Now, his wife was not in the arena. She was not there. But Mercedes was there. And so because the propaganda machine of the Democrat Party is stupid, ignorant, dishonest, corrupt, and powerful, they can win, as Michael Corleone observed. This is how they opened up the show, their opening monologue, setting up their joke that they had already planned for later on.
Former President Trump told supporters last week that former First Lady Melania Trump will soon be making more regular appearances on the campaign trail. Not if she heard what you called her last week.
I call up my wife our great First Lady. She was a great First. People loved her. Yeah, people love her. Oh, look at that. Wow. Mercedes, that's pretty good.
I'm sorry. Mercedes? You had a nuclear meltdown when Biden messed up the president of Egypt and you can't remember your wife's name? Guys, I hate to say it, his mind is slipping. I think he's too old to run.
It was the president of Mexico's name he messed up by calling him the name of the president of Egypt, and only a moron would do that, and only a moron would tell that joke, because if you've got the Google machine, in about 8 seconds, you could see that President Trump spotted Mercedes Schlapp in the front row, pointed at her, had a little back and forth with her, and he knows the difference between his wife, who didn't fly in with him on his private 757 to Washington, D.C. to participate in CPAC before getting back on his private 757 to fly to South Carolina for the primary. But that's the joke. And the idiots in Seth Meyers' audience who are not bright enough. They don't follow the news. They don't understand. But there it is. And now, why would he tell that really bad joke that had already been debunked? Anybody with 2 brain cells knew that it was wrong. And if you didn't, that's okay. Then you'll look it up if you're going to write the joke for a national television show. But they're just that filthy. They're that corrupt. Then they start talking to Joe Biden. Joe Biden he waddles out, and his arms are hanging, and he's got a weird smile, and he's been cursing somebody out backstage. And then the fluff begins.
You mentioned some classified materials, some documents recently leaked, some classified documents. And this isn't a gotcha show, but I do want to ask about it, that says you are currently 81 years old.
Who the hell told you that?
Yeah.
That's classified.
That's classified. All jokes aside, according to recent polling, this is a real concern
What joke?
For American voters. How do you address that concern going forward as you come up to the 2024 election?
Well, a couple things. Number one, you got to take a look at the other guy. He's about as old as I am, but he can't remember his wife's name.
Yeah.
And,
see, now, in order to make that prearranged and staged joke work, they had to build in that fraud in the monologue at the beginning of the show. Otherwise, the clueless audience who are all stoned would have no idea what they were talking about. So and that is another element that proves that the whole thing was scripted in advance. You can't assume the audience would get that pre-written joke loaded into the teleprompter if you didn't build in that fraud Mercedes Melania moment in the opening monologue, right? So that contributes to our belief that the whole thing was scripted in advance, with the White House working with NBC and the Seth Meyers show with a fraud. And he didn't screw up the name of the president of Egypt. He screwed up the name of the president of Mexico. So their writers are so ignorant. They don't follow the news. They don't even know what jokes they're writing. And that's because they murdered comedy long ago. And it's just a political, yada, yada. And if you want to talk about Joe Biden's memory, if I were doing the show, if Michael Piercy and I were doing this national television show, they'd say, oh, yeah, Trump didn't remember the name of his wife. He doesn't know the name of his wife, except he was talking about Mercedes Schlapp, who was in the front row, and that's why he called her Mercedes. And his wife, Melania, was not with him that day. But none of that matters in the propaganda world of the American left. Now, Joe Biden, on the other hand, was talking another hard-hitting interview with Cardi B. And I won't even go into all the things about Cardi B. And Joe Biden has no idea how many grandchildren he has.
I got 4 kids, 5 grandkids. Come on. I'm an expert.
3 kids, 6 grandkids, but who's counting? Apparently not you. And there he is saying he's got 5 grandkids a couple of days later.
I have 6 grandchildren, and I'm crazy about them.
Well, you're crazy.
I speak to them every single day. Not a joke.
Not a joke. Then Dr. Jill Biden, who's not a doctor, was called upon in another awkward moment to correct her dim-witted husband.
My name is Jill, and this is my husband, Joe. And your children may not know, but we have 3 children, and we have 6 grandchildren.
But wait a minute, you have 3 children, you have 6 grandchildren, but he said you have 5, and then I'm completely... but they're, you know what? They're still leaving one out, because they're leaving out Hunter Biden's love child, Navy Joan Roberts, who was born to the exotic dancer who seems like a lovely woman, and the kid looks like a cute kid, but they don't acknowledge their 7th grandchild, and yet they have a national platform to spread the falsehood that President Trump doesn't know his wife's name. Absolutely amazing stuff. We got to take a pause here, and we'll come back because there's more Joe Biden proving that his brain doesn't work. But Seth Meyers and NBC, they are fakes, they're frauds, they're liars, they're propagandists, they're leftists, and they want Venezuelan gangs to be roaming the halls of your children's schools. That's what the Democrats want. And we are at 888-630-9625. And there's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and We've got all kinds of Democrat mental illness, and the great Republican lieutenant governor in Virginia calling a man sir, and it made the Democrats go crazy.
I did say 5. You're right. So let me see. I got 1 in New York, 2 in... You're confusing me.
Speaking of corrupt media and propaganda, the headline today is Don Lemon. Remember Don Lemon? CNN. He sued CNN when they got rid of him because he's so horrible and awful and has no regard for the truth, and he lies all the time. But they hired him. They put him on the air, and he's a big fat liar, right? Don Lemon signs $24.5 million separation deal with CNN after being ousted from network. Well, I got to get me one of those TV jobs, huh? How about that? Don Lemon is even richer after being fired from CNN almost a year ago. The ousted anchor signed a $24.5 million separation deal with his former employer, CNN, officially ending their years-long relationship, Radar Online has learned. The Washington Post doesn't report anything, honestly. Insiders with direct knowledge about the situation shared details on Lemon and CNN's agreement. The $24.5 million allegedly covers the complete pay from his final contract. So they fired him, but they got to pay out his contract. He's got a very good agent, I think, very, very strong agent, which was meant to extend more than 3 years beyond the April 2023 firing, the Wrap reported on Monday. After 17 years at CNN, I was at CNN for 17 years. I got $1.50. After 17 years at CNN, I would have thought someone in management would have had the decency to tell me directly. Why would you think that? Were you working at the same CNN I was working at? Lemon wrote on X announcing his termination. CNN later shot back, that is inaccurate. But never mind that. He got $24.5 million because, lawyers, good lawyer, good agent too. Just saying,